What's up, guys? This is Nick from Arch City Poker, and in today's vlog, topic is going to be flush draws and part of the continuing series of how to beat live low stakes poker. Had a lot of players, some of my students, I guess, ask me, what do I do with flush draws? When am I supposed to be aggressive with them? When am I supposed to be more passive and just call with them? I'm going to give some just general advice for the low stakes player pools that you guys will often be playing in. And this advice, to be honest, can really work for really any stakes. I think for the most part, the more I think about it, but I think that this will be a pretty simple and general, strategy as far as that's concerned. But let's get right into it. When to be aggressive with a flush draw? Well, I would say when the board basically does not hit your opponent's range all that hard. Um, to give you guys an example, let's say your opponent, and these will be heads up pots, but let's say your opponent is in middle position and he opens to 5x. So let's say it's a 1-2 game and he opens to $10. And we are in the big blind with king 10 of diamonds and we decide to call. And the flop is 8-7-6 with 2 diamonds. Now, this flop texture should not really smash your opponent's range that hard all that often. He's going to have a lot of Broadway combos that have missed this flop texture completely. He's going to really not smash this board in terms of like having hands that are 2 pair plus. You will hit this board much more often than he will, and that's not as important as in these stakes. These players are often just thinking about their own hand and how it hits the board. And so the main thing is this flop texture, obviously, like I said, does not hit your opponent hard enough, often enough. So let's say you check and your opponent bets half pot. I think this is a really good spot to be more aggressive with your flush draw and be aggressive for a few reasons. Like I said, your opponent doesn't hit this board hard enough, often enough. Another good reason is our king and 10 specifically, holding king 10 of diamonds, it blocks some of his continues. It takes away some of his combos of pocket kings and pocket 10s, which would continue against our aggression. But I think that's a pretty good reason to take this aggressive line. I also think that, like I said, the board can definitely hit us harder than our opponent, although I don't think that's as important. What's important is that our opponent just doesn't hit this board hard enough, often enough. And another quick point to kind of wrap up the aggressive, I guess, part of this strategy is that on this specific flop texture, we're not going to have a lot of implied odds, I don't think, on this board. It's going to be hard to get paid off because our opponent will start thinking about what kinds of hands we can have possibly, and obviously we can have some really good ones on this flop texture with this dynamic, with us being in the big blind and flatting middle position raise. So I do think that when you have more fold equity, when you lack showdown value, which we do because our combo is king high, and when the board does not hit our opponent's range that hard, I think that all adds up to the aggressive line being more profitable than the passive line. And flatting in this spot will be profitable, but I believe that going for like either a lead or check raise is going to be a little bit better here. Now, when to be more passive with your flush draws? Basically, it's just the flip side of everything I just said. When your opponent's range smashes the board texture or the flop texture, then I think that's probably a spot to definitely be a little more passive. Let's take the last hand example of that dynamic. Let's say your middle position opponent opens to 5x again. Let's say you flat out of the big blind. Let's say this time you have 8-7 of diamonds, and the flop comes ace king 10 with 2 diamonds. We check, and our opponent bets pot this time. Well, right away, the bet sizing is a pretty good tell that you probably don't have a lot of fold equity. It's a board that he obviously likes, and it's a flop texture that obviously hits his range quite well. He's gonna be very uncapped on this board texture. He's gonna have 2 pair plus very often on this flop compared to what you will have. So I do think that this would be a spot where you would be a little bit more passive with your hand and you would go for a call. I think that although you lack showdown value, it's a spot where you don't really have fold equity. And so I think that calling with some implied odds is actually the way to go because, let's say your opponent has ace king on this board and the 4 of diamonds turns. I think you're getting paid, if you decide to go for check raise, you're probably gonna get called there. You could get called on the river if you go like bet possibly, turn river. So I think that we have more implied odds in the spot and less fold equity. Therefore, I believe the more passive line with your flush draw will be a little bit more profitable. Some final thoughts to kind of wrap up this vlog. One is I was talking about lack of showdown value with your flush draws. So let's say on that first hand example where we go back to when we're more aggressive, and it was an 8-7-6 flop with 2 diamonds. So let's say the 7 and the 6 are both the diamonds. And let's say instead of king 10 of diamonds, you have ace 8 of diamonds, or maybe ace queen of diamonds. With those specific combos, you have more showdown value. Let's say, for example, with ace 8, like I see opponents check raise this combo all the time in this spot, and it's going to be profitable, but you're really just kind of turning your hand into a bluff at that point. I think you have a lot of showdown value with that top pair at that point, and I think you're just wasting it by turning your hand to a bluff and very often just not getting really the best result with that hand. I think you're probably better off when you have really good showdown value, really being a little bit more passive with your flush draws. And in that, I know in that spot it's obviously top pair plus the flush draw, but we're still talking about a flush draw in general. So yeah, I think just keep in mind when you lack showdown value, or if you have a lot of showdown value. If you have a lot, then maybe don't waste it, and maybe take the more passive line and get more value out of your hand that way. The last and very final thought, I guess, is I would say be a little bit careful when you're bluffing the river with missed flush draws. The reason for this is that you obviously block some combos of your opponent's peeling range. Basically, you block combos of the bottom of his range or his flush draws. Therefore, he's gonna be just a little bit more pair heavy. It's gonna be a little bit more likely that he's gonna call you. It, especially depending on your image, it could look like to them that you just have a missed flush draw a lot. So I'm not saying there's never spots where you shouldn't bluff your missed flush draws on the river. I think that if you really think about how, yeah, especially if you have more of a thinking opponent, which a lot of these players are not often, but if you can really represent a ton of value hands, then that would be a spot with no showdown value to go ahead and probably pull the trigger. But like I said, just be mindful of that. Don't just bluff every missed flush draw on the river, because a lot of times you'll just be burning money, especially if it's a player that's like stationy, or if it's a loose passive player. Then don't ever consider that, because then they're just going to be calling too often with weak pairs. So that's going to do it for this vlog and this topic on flush draws. I hope that this general advice on when to be aggressive with them and when to be passive is pretty helpful for you guys. If you have any questions or comments, as always, go ahead and let me know in the comment section, and I will do the best I can to respond pretty quickly. So this is Nick from Arch City Poker. Till next time.